wait for the PowerPoint to emerge. There you go. Hi, good morning, everybody. It's nice to be here with you. We're going to do some very practical philosophy today, because philosophy is a practical discipline. People don't realize this. We're going to be discussing a very practical question. The question is, and we're going to learn a skill together. What do you do when you find out that you're just a fictional character? And that's a practical question, because if you ever do find that out one day, you'll now be qualified to, react in a good way. So don't say that philosophy isn't practical. Now, before we get going with the ideas that I want to kind of explore with you, ideas which I take to be central to Chassidut, to the philosophy of Hasidism in general, I want to make some distinctions with you in the philosophy of fiction, the philosophy of fiction. Now, I know my friend Shane is in the audience, and I know that he likes Harry Potter, right? So tell me, put your hands up if you think this is a true sentence. Harry Potter is a wizard. Have any of you read the book? There's a very few hands. Okay, so let's try this one out. Sorry, I forgot to. I've been doing this on my own, but there we go. One second. Harry Potter is a wizard. Let's try this one out. Harry Potter is an investment banker. Who thinks that's true? Okay, well, he has made J.K. Rowling a lot of money. There is that, right? But he's not an investment banker, right? So there are some things which are true in the story and some things which are false in the story. That seems plausible. But again, put your hand up if you think he's a wizard. Okay. Put your hand up if you think he's an investment banker. Okay, good. That seems like a healthy response, right? Now here we are now. Harry Potter doesn't exist. Who thinks that's true? Okay, a lot of... Well, we've got to be careful here, because clearly he exists in some sense or other because we're talking about him, but he's not a person of flesh and blood. He's something like an idea. So certainly there's a sense in which he doesn't exist. He's not a physical human being. But here's a problem. Again, put your hands up if you think he's a wizard. Well, how can you be a wizard if you don't exist? Surely, one of the things you need to do to be a wizard is to exist. I mean, I've got to sound clever. I've got an English accent, so let's move away from Harry Potter to Hamlet. Okay, Hamlet is a prince of Denmark, right? I mean, if you didn't think he was a prince of Denmark, then you clearly haven't read the play or seen the play. He's a prince of Denmark. But then, if you go onto Wikipedia and you look at a list of all, Wikipedia isn't an academically reputable, I shouldn't have said that, but if you do good research, go to the Britannica Encyclopedia, that's better, and you look for a list of all Danish princes, you won't find Hamlet listed. And there's a reason for this. You see, Hamlet has a lot of the qualifications necessary for being a prince of Denmark. 1, he's the son of a Danish king. 2, he's male. That's what stops him from being a princess. 3, he's Danish. That helps if you want to be a Danish prince, presumably. The only thing he's lacking is existing. And unfortunately, to be a Danish prince, you need to exist as well. So we're in a little bit of the puzzle here is we have a list of sentences. We think that the first one is true, but we also think that the third one is true, and we don't understand how to make sense of their both being true together. We all agree that the second one is false. The second one is false not merely because Harry Potter doesn't exist, but also because even in the story he's not an investment banker. So what do we make of this? And there are different philosophical approaches to truth in fiction. One is to say that you guys are all wrong when you say that Harry Potter is a wizard. He's not, because he doesn't exist. So in fact, the only thing that's true on this slide, according to this way of thinking, is the final one. And this is called the pretense theory of fiction. So the idea is Harry Potter isn't a wizard, but we pretend he is when we read the story. That's one way of going. Another way of going, which I think is better for all sorts of reasons, I'm not going to go into it now, is to say, no, the first one is true. It's really true. But it's true only relative to the story. Okay? And the third one is true, really true, but not just relative to the story, but outside of the story. The second one is false inside the story and false outside of the story. So when dealing with fiction, we need to talk about truth in the fiction and truth outside of the fiction. Is everyone with me? Okay, so let's bear that in mind. That's going to help us as we move on. Okay, we're going to learn a piece of Hasidus together now from a very, very profound Rebbe, Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Lehner, who wrote the Mei Shloach, the Ishbitzer Rebbe. And here he's commenting on a parsha in the Torah in which Joseph is called to interpret the dream of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream. That's from the wrong musical, isn't it? Because, Joseph is a musical, but that's Les Miserables. Oh well. And Pharaoh said, although God wrote this before Victor Hugo. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard it said of you that you can hear a dream in order to interpret it. That's the verse from the Bible. And this is what the Mei Shloach says. Because all of the matters of this world are but a dream in need of interpretation. Hold on a minute, what? The world is a dream? So who's dreaming it? If the world's a dream, who do you imagine's dreaming it? It could be us. It could be us. And it places in this text, it looks like it's us who's doing the dreaming. But it also could be Hashem. It could be that Hashem is dreaming a dream and we're somehow characters in it. Okay. And just as it is interpreted, so it will come to be for him. There the him seems to be the person doing the interpreting. This is very interesting. So much, you have a dream. You have a strange dream. You dream that you were a dolphin on a piece of marmalade coated toast. And you wake up in the morning and you turn over to your beloved and you say, I just had a dream. I dreamed that I was a dolphin on top of some marmalade-covered toast. And your wife says, what? And you say, what do you think that means? And she says, I think it means you need some help. But in truth, what does a dream mean? The Ishbitz is suggesting that to a very significant extent, it's up to you what it means. It's up to you what it means. This is why therapy is so important, but also potentially so dangerous. Because it might not be the case that there's a fact of the matter, what your dream meant, but it will take on a meaning as soon as you interpret it in a certain way. It will come to have that meaning for you. Says the Ishbitzer, that's true of life itself, of the things that happen to you in your life. A person who understands regarding everything, that everything is only from the blessed God and that everything lives from the mouth of God. So now you start to see that the dream is God. It's God dreaming. But a person a person inside the dream who understands that everything comes from God, then they understand the reason for everything and can taste the divine in each event and reaches true life. It is like bread. We could just move on. You all understood the analogy. It's like bread, right? Got it? It's like bread. Good. But for those of you who don't understand, we'll read on further, just in case you didn't get the obvious analogy to bread. The main sustenance that is found in it is the word of God. You eat the bread, it keeps you alive. Why does it keep you alive? Because God somehow is giving it a power. You think it's the nutritional value of the bread. No. There's the verse in the Bible, man cannot live on bread alone. Beautiful verse. I had a friend at school who misinterpreted that verse and thought that if you eat bread all by yourself, you'll die, right? Man cannot live on bread alone. And she had a phobia of eating bread alone because the Bible said man cannot live on bread alone. But it's God inside the bread that makes it good for you. It's a strange idea, right? And if you eat simply like an animal, then you just take from the bread the nutrients in it, and it'll keep you alive for some time. But whoever understands that the sustenance is actually divine, they don't just take from it temporal life in this world. They take from the bread eternal life. For the letters of the word bread in Hebrew, lechem, is an anagram for dream, chalom. That is to say, the bread needs an interpretation. So do all pleasures, because bread is an analogy. It's kind of an archetype for all the pleasures and good things in the world. Every bite of bread that you eat requires an interpretation. You're living in a story. God is dreaming you up. But the question is, what does this story mean? And who's that up to? According to the Ishbitzer, it's not really up to God. It's up to you. So what's going on here? And can we make sense of this philosophically? Now we'll bear in mind all of the philosophy of fiction we just did beforehand. Speaking about truth in fiction. Harry Potter has free will. Who thinks that's true? Put your hands up if you think Harry Potter has free will. Really? Again, have you read the story? Because, this is not a story about a robot. It's a story about a human being. I think that, if you're in an English literature class and you say, why did Harry Potter do that? And you said, oh, because J.K. Rowling wrote it that way, right? Your English literature teacher is not going to be happy with you. The question is, why did Harry Potter choose to do the things he did? The question assumes that he has free will. And in the story, he does. Isn't that right, Shane? Where's Shane? Shane? Can't see you. Does he have free will? You think he's got free will? That's right. You're right. But of course, it's also true that Harry Potter only does what J.K. Rowling says he's going to do. That's also true. But we now have the philosophical tools to deal with this, remember? Because there are different layers of truth, so to speak. There's what's true relative to the story, Harry Potter has free will, and there's what's true relative to the world outside of the story, which is that Harry Potter only does what J.K. Rowling dreams up for him. One of the most worrying problems about this idea that the whole world is just a dream in the mind of God is that, well, what does that do to our freedom? If I'm just a character in a story that God is telling, then what does that do to me, to my freedom? Well, the first thing I want to tell you, remember this is a practical philosophy class. What do you do when you find out you're only fictional? Lesson 1, don't worry. Okay. Don't worry, because in the story, you're not fictional. In the story, you're not fictional. Do you have free will? Yes, you do, in the story. Now, you might say, yeah, but I don't just want free will in the story. I want free will in the real world. Well, think about it a minute. Sherlock Holmes lives on 221B Baker Street, right? But in the years in which he was alive, Baker Street didn't have that many houses on it. Now, should this worry Sherlock Holmes? No, because he has a key to 221B Baker Street, and he's got a bed there, and he's fine. Because what matters most to a character is what's true in their story. And that should be the same for us. What should matter most to us is what's true in the world in which we're living. And in the world in which we're living, we really do have free will. But there's this higher level of reality that doesn't need to bother us most of the time, in which, do you know what? There's only God, nothing else. And he's dreaming a dream, and he's telling a story. What do you do when you find out that you're fictional? There's a Hasidic Rebbe called Kurt Vonnegut, who wrote a very profound Hasidic moshel, a very profound Hasidic story called The Breakfast of Champions. And I want to learn it with you. I want to learn it inside with you. It's a really beautiful piece. I think it's very, very profound. Before we do it, 1 second. You need to bear in mind, Kurt Vonnegut, when he wrote this book, was turning 50. And in his novels, he's a novelist, an American novelist. He's not a Hasidic Rebbe. In fact, he was an atheist. But he was turning 50 when he wrote this novel. And he had a character who he used in a lot of his stories. He kind of recycled this character. And the character is called Kilgore Trout. Nice name. And in the story, Kurt Vonnegut decides, because he's turning 50, to go to this place, a fictional place, called Midland City, and meet his character, Kilgore Trout, tell him that he's just a fictional character, and set him free, because he's not going to use him anymore. Although he lied, because he used him again in other books, but okay, that doesn't matter. I get out of my rented car. I did it noisily. You can follow along if you like. 1 second. I got out of my rented car. I did it noisily, so his ears would tell him a lot about his creator. Even if he was unwilling to use his eyes, I slammed the car door firmly. As I approached him from the driver's side of the car, I swiveled my feet some, so that my footsteps were not only deliberate, but gritty too. I stopped with the tips of my shoes on the rim of the narrow field of his downcast eyes. "Mr. Trout, I love you," I said gently. "I have broken your mind to pieces. I want to make it whole. I want you to feel a wholeness and an inner harmony such as I have never allowed you to feel before. I want you to raise your eyes to look at what I have in my hand." I had nothing in my hand. But such was my power over Trout that he would see in it whatever I wished him to see. I might have shown him a Helen of Troy, for instance, only 6 inches tall. "Mr. Trout, Kilgore," I said. "I hold in my hand a symbol of wholeness and harmony and nourishment. It is oriental in its simplicity, but we are Americans, Kilgore, and not Chinamen. We Americans require symbols which are richly colored and three-dimensional and juicy. Most of all, we hunger for symbols which have not been poisoned by great sins our nation has committed, such as slavery and genocide and criminal neglect, or by tin horn commercial greed and cunning. Look up, Mr. Trout," I said. And I waited patiently. "Kilgore?" The old man looked up. And he had my father's wasted face when my father was a widower, when my father was an old man. He saw that I held an apple in my hand. "I'm approaching my 50th birthday, Mr. Trout," I said. "I am cleansing and renewing myself for the very different sorts of years to come. I am going to set at liberty all the literary characters who have served me so loyally during my writing career. You are the only one I am telling. Arise, Mr. Trout. You are free. You are free." He arose shamblingly. I might have shaken his hand, but his right hand was injured, so our hands remained dangling at our sides. "Bon voyage," I said. I disappeared. I somersaulted lazily and pleasantly through the void, which is my hiding place when I dematerialize. Trout's cries to me faded as the distance between us increased. His voice was my father's voice. Here was what Kilgore Trout cried out to me in my father's voice. "Make me young. Make me young. Make me young." There's so much here. It's a very, very rich piece of literature. And what we see is Kurt Vonnegut is playing between these different levels of truth. Some of the things he says here are true inside the story, and some of the things he says here are true outside of the story, and it's hard to make sense of what's really going on. But the first thing I want to touch on is how profound Kilgore Trout's response is to finding out that he's merely fictional. How do we rate fictional characters? If you are a literary reviewer, how do you rate a good one from a bad one? Shout out, what makes a fictional character a good one? True to life. Relevant, relatable. True to themselves, true to the author. Three-dimensional, complex, poignant, symbolic. So you might think, if you find out that what you are is a fictional character, is you should say to your author, "Oh, make me a good one. Make me three-dimensional. Make me poignant. Make me true to life." He says, "Make me young." And that's a reasonable thing to say. Because in the story, Kilgore Trout is not fictional. All that Kilgore Trout comes to learn is that there's a perspective from outside the story in which there's this man called Kurt Vonnegut who can make things true or false in our story. So he does the most rational thing. He says, "Please, give me wealth, give me youth, give me health." Because actually, not much changes when you find out that you're fictional, which is kind of my second lesson. So this isn't a very exciting class. What do you do when you find out you're fictional? Nothing much, and it doesn't matter. Okay, but I think there's something profound there. I do think there's something profound there. Okay, so I want to move on. You stay true to your character, but you also, there's a beautiful film called Stranger Than Fiction with Will Ferrell. Will Ferrell is walking down the street one day, and he hears Emma Thompson's voice Well, that would make you prick your ears up anyway. But what Emma Thompson is doing is narrating his every action. And he comes to discover that he's just a character in a novel that Emma Thompson is writing. And it becomes quite scary because as he's crossing the road one morning, he hears the voice saying, "And Will Ferrell was crossing the road one morning. It was a normal morning, but little did he know it was the last day of his life." I was like, oh, what do you do? Who do you go to for advice? He wasn't Jewish, so he didn't know to go to a rabbi. He probably should have gone to a therapist, but he didn't do that either. He didn't go to a philosopher. That would have been my first choice. No, he went to a professor of literature. And the professor of literature said to him, well, it was Dustin Hoffman. Dustin Hoffman said to Will Ferrell, well, what you have to figure out is, are you in a comedy or a tragedy? That's a profound piece of advice too, because the gentleman over here said, what you do when you find out you're fictional is you still have to stay true to yourself, but you have to recognize that you are a work in progress. Your story is unfolding. And just like the Ishbitzer said, who you are is very much up to you. What kind of story you're in is very much up to you. How are you going to interpret this world? Now, this way of thinking, I suggest, makes a great deal of sense of a lot of Hasidus. So I'm going to share with you the words of another Hasidic Rebbe, Milan Kundera, from The Unbearable Likeness of Being. I'm going to make a ruling that none of you should read it. But I've done it for you, and I've taken out the one sentence which is kosher. And it's really profound. It's really profound. He's talking about one of his characters, Teresa, who is stuck in a situation in which she feels torn between something she deeply wants to do, so to speak, her soul desires something, but she's also feeling nauseous, so her body won't let her do it because she wants to be sick. So she's stuck in the tension, so to speak, between mind and body. Her mind wants one thing, her body wants another. And Milan Kundera says it's in this moment that she was born. What does that mean? It means that I, Milan Kundera, was really interested in the tension between mind and body, so I made a character called Teresa. Characters are not born like people of woman. They are born of a situation, a sentence, a metaphor containing in a nutshell a basic human possibility that the author thinks no one else has discovered or said something essential about. Of course, the character is born of a woman. Teresa has a mother. In the story, we even learn about her. We even hear about the birth in a hospital in Czechoslovakia. She has a mother. We're dealing with two layers of truth again. It's true in the story that she has a mother who's a woman. But outside of the story, her real mother, so to speak, is a metaphor. Because every character is a metaphor for something that the author's trying to express in a story. So you read the story of the Bible. Abraham is the son of a woman, Mrs. Terach. We don't know her real name, but we assume there was one. He was born of a woman. A man and a woman had a child called Abraham. And he lived a life, and real things happened to him. He was a historical character who did things and achieved things. But in the world of Hasidus, in the world of Kabbalah, he's also an expression of an idea. He symbolizes God's chesed, God's loving kindness. And when you learn more of the Kabbalistic tradition, what you come to realize is that every single character in the Tanakh, in the Bible, is a representation of some idea or other. And these ideas tend to be characteristics of God himself. So God's chesed is represented in this world by Abraham. God's din, his justice, is represented in this world by Yitzchak. Emet, truth, ironically, given Jacob's relationship to the truth. Jacob, Yaakov, comes to manifest God's truth on earth. So now you start to understand that when the Torah tells us a story, there are two things happening. There's what's true in the story, a real history about real people meeting one another. But there's also the drama, so to speak, that's going on in the mind of God that is being expressed through the unfolding of the story. One of my teachers said, it sounds quite heretical, But the key to Hasidus is to realize that what the Hasidim are doing, they're putting God on the couch, right? They're looking at his story, the story that he's telling, and coming to know more about him through the story that he's telling, through the dream that he's dreaming. So that's a key to unlocking some part of Hasidus, but also our lives. Because the thing is, the story doesn't end with the Bible. The story's still happening. And each one of us is a character in this dream. And each one of us is in Will Ferrell's situation. And we have to figure out, are we in a comedy? Are we in a tragedy? More profoundly, we have to figure out, what are we metaphors for? So, with that comes to the end of the slides. But I want to kind of explore a few issues that have kind of been left hanging. The religious significance of this kind of way of thinking, I think, is really profound. Like I said, what are we a metaphor for? But there's a tension in Jewish thought. On the one hand, we're supposed to say that the whole world was created just for us. I know some people who are very good at believing that. The whole world was created just for them. But we're also supposed to be humble, like dust and ashes. How can you be humble and also believe the whole world was made just for you? That's a tough thing to pull off. Here's a way we can think about it. If there are 7 billion people on Earth, then do you know how many novels God is writing right now? 7 billion novels. And in each one of those novels, a different person is the lead character. So you are the lead character of a novel that God is writing. It's all about you. You're the star of the show. The whole world was created just for you. And many of the other characters in this story are just incidental. But the thing is, there's no such thing as an incidental character. Because every single person has a novel being written about them in which they are the star of the show and you're merely incidental. I told this story on Shabbos. I was in Cape Town and I was davening in the morning, and someone had left their Google Maps on their phone. And an American accented voice emanated from this chap's pocket as I was putting my tefillin on, and it said, "Where do you want to go today?" And you see, it's true in the story. It's true in the story. That just happened because a guy was forgetful and forgot to put his phone on silent or turn Google Maps on. There was no more meaning to it than that in the story. But if we remember that there's a higher level of reality in which God is actually, this isn't just stuff happening, but God is telling a story, then it's legitimate for me to say, why was it that I had to hear that right then? What was God trying to say to me through that American voice coming through the pocket? And it turns out that if you're in this headspace, and I'm not suggesting it's an easy place to be all the time, but if you're in this headspace, every experience can be a religious experience. Every single experience can be a religious experience. And every human being that you meet isn't just some person. They're a character in God's story. They are born of a metaphor. They're an idea that God is trying to unpack. What a profound idea that is. You see people in a completely different light. You know, as a teacher, I have students. As an employer, you have employees. You have subordinates, people who are underneath you. We have communal, national, racial distinctions. But it's all actually meaningless. Because every person, the people who work for you, the people that you work for, Jew, non-Jew, white, black, Asian, whatever, they are all a character. And God is writing a novel about them. And you have the privilege of meeting them. And you have the possibility of learning something, not just about them, but about God, from being in the same room as them. Every human interaction with people who are good, with people who are bad, with people who are nice, with people who want to cheat you. Every single human interaction is potentially a religious experience. So this is deep stuff, but it's also problematic, philosophically and theologically problematic. And I'll give you one problem We spoke about free will. It makes it look like you have no free will. Well, we've tried to deal with that. We try to say you do have free will in the story, and that's what really matters. But what about the problem of evil? Every single bad thing that happens, God is the author of on this way of thinking. Some theologians would be much more comfortable with a less immanent God, a God who's less directly involved in micromanaging everything that goes on. There's a whole thing called the free will defense, where you say, look, don't blame God for most of the bad stuff that happens. It's our fault. God gave us free will and we do bad stuff. It's our fault, not God's fault. But on this way of viewing things, God is the author of everything, then it's God's fault the entire time. So let me just give you two brief responses to this. What we have to realize is this world is a novel, but it's no ordinary novel. It's a postmodernist novel. What do I mean by that? Well, in some novels, the author is conspicuously absent. J.K. Rowling, am I right, Shane? Does J.K. Rowling appear in Harry Potter as a character? No, she's nowhere to be seen, right? For all we know, in the world of Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling doesn't even exist, right? Is that fair? Right. So there are some novels in which the author doesn't appear as a character, but then you have novels like The Breakfast of Champions, where the author himself is one of the characters, Kurt Vonnegut. This story that we live in is a story in which the author appears as a character. God comes into the story. He splits the Red Sea. He creates the world even in the story. He talks to the prophets. He can answer our prayers. This is a postmodern novel. So what we have to do is when we think about the problem of evil, we have to distinguish between two levels, in the story and outside of the story. In the story, God is a loving, kind, wonderful God who gives us free will, and when we make mistakes, it's our fault. That's what's true in the story. You can't blame Shakespeare for what Hamlet does in the story. You can't. So the normal defenses of God in the face of evil, they work when what you're defending is God, the character, in the story. But there's a higher perspective from which the only thing that really exists is God. Then it seems like he's guilty for our suffering. But then you have to realize from that perspective, our suffering isn't really suffering because we're just fictional. It's a hard place to get your head into. I'm not pretending this is easy. But I want to share with you in the last few minutes a Gemara in Masechet Menachot. Gemara that means a lot to me because it's about time travel and I like time travel. And it's a Gemara in which Moshe meets Rabbi Akiva. And I have a son called Moshe Akiva. So this matters to me, this Gemara. Moshe Rabbeinu gets into the DeLorean. I'm rephrasing it slightly, but it's pretty much accurate. Moshe Akiva gets in the DeLorean and he goes many years into the future and he sees this man called Rabbi Akiva who's just a tremendous teacher of Torah. And Moshe doesn't feel adequate to have been the receptacle of the Torah. Why didn't you wait for Rabbi Akiva to be your prophet, to be your receptacle of the Torah, to be the lawgiver in chief? Why did you do it through me? He's much better. So God gives an answer. Then Moshe says, I want to see what happens to him. I want to see what his end is. So Moshe Rabbeinu gets into the DeLorean and goes a bit further into the future. And he sees the despicable, painful murder of Rabbi Akiva, his martyrdom. And Moshe Rabbeinu turns to God and he says, Zu Torah v'zu schara. This is the Torah and this is its reward. Really, God? Is that okay? And Hashem responds, Shtok. Be quiet. Kachala b'machshava. I'll translate it in a minute. Let me tell you the wrong translation. This is the danger of trusting the Sonsino. The Sonsino says, silence, for so it has been decreed. That's not what the Hebrew says. Shtok. Kachala b'machshava. Quiet. For so it arose in my mind. When an author writes a story, they create a character and then they just unpack it. It has all these latent possibilities and they unpack it. They can even, so to speak, be surprised by the things they find in it. As this isn't a callous experience. an uncaring experience. It could be painful for the author. There's a story according to which Tolstoy was writing Anna Karenina, and he was crying. And one of his servants came into the room and said, Leo, probably didn't call him by first name, Count Tolstoy, what's wrong? He said it in Russian too, but I'm not, okay. And he's crying, and through his tears he said, she jumped. She killed herself. Sorry, I've ruined the story for those of you who haven't written Anna Karenina. Still read it. She jumped, and he's crying. Well, the thing is, Tolstoy, couldn't you have written it some other way? So don't make her jump if he's going to make you cry. Send her to a Haagen-Dazs restaurant. No, you can't do that. Kachala b'machshava. Tolstoy was trying to express an idea through Anna Karenina, and he had to unfold that idea faithfully to the idea. And it wasn't all that easy for him to do. It was painful. That's why Hashem is saying to Moshe Rabbeinu, with Rabbi Akiva's painful death, I was trying to bring something into the world, some idea that had to be stated. And kachala b'machshava, this is how its end came to me. It's painful for me, but that's just the way it is. It had to be that way. So I throw those suggestions to you just because I want to say that I don't think the problem of evil is worse or more problematic for this kind of theology, the theology of God as author or dreamer. I just think the problem is more complicated and multifaceted when you look at it through this way of thinking. So what I wanted to share with you is the idea, and I'll close up with this, is that thinking of God as our dreamer, as our author, can be a really powerful way of investing every single moment of our life with theological and religious significance. Another time, please God, I'll be back in South Africa one day, and we can have a conversation about, but why would you view God this way rather than some other way? But perhaps part of the response is that it's the only way of doing justice to the sense in which God is so distant, so transcendent, so other, so distant, and yet so unbelievably close, all at once. Shakespeare, J.K. Rowling doesn't even exist in the story, and yet she's all over it. Right, so I think this is a very profound way of looking at our theology, and I hope that you've got something from it. But just don't worry. You're fictional, don't panic. Thank you.